Thank you, Donald, and good evening, everybody. Well, a series of votes last night, an exciting series of votes, which I followed by listening to Ian Dale, and it was very interesting. I think that actually for the Leave side, it was a reasonably encouraging, and we did call it. I did say I didn't think the Cooper Amendment would get through. That was the one, of course, that proposed to extend Article 50, perhaps up until the end of this year, because what's kind of going on here is a lot of these MPs are going back to their constituencies and they're feeling the wrath of their constituents who are saying, what on earth are you playing at? We voted Brexit, please get on with it. Mrs May, of course, was very happy that Sir Graham Brady's amendment got through. Why? Well, two reasons. One, it brought together the disparate wings of the Conservative Party. You know, suddenly you've got Jacob Rees-Mogg and Nicky Morgan being friendly, and they all agree Theresa May must come back to Brussels, reopen the withdrawal agreement, and bin the backstop. And Mrs May, despite all the things she said in the past, appeared last night to be committed to doing that. Well, I was pretty confident that today's story would be what was going to happen here in Brussels. So there I was at 3:30 Brussels time, sitting in seat number 20. And of course, next to me in seat number 21, Commission President Jean-Claude Juncker. And we were all waiting, in response to the British Parliament getting a majority for something, namely a change to the backstop so that the withdrawal agreement would probably go through. Would Brussels make concessions? Well, here was Jean-Claude Juncker.
The withdrawal agreement remains the best and only deal possible. The European Union said so in November. We said so in December. We said so after the first meaningful vote in the Commons in January. The debate and votes in the House of Commons yesterday do not change that. The withdrawal agreement will not be renegotiated.
There is no renegotiation, and we had Mr Barnier coming up afterwards and saying that the whole concept of the backstop was part and parcel of the withdrawal agreement. Other speakers in the House saying there would be no change. Funny, isn't it? Mrs May makes concession after concession, and the one time she needs just a little bit back from them, they are prepared to give nothing. And I responded to that by telling them that I felt their language and behaviour in many ways had got us to this point.
Before the referendum, no one knew who the European Commission were. That Maoist Barroso was a complete unknown. You guys are now household names. And what we've seen is an appreciation in Britain that unelected bureaucrats in Brussels have been talking down to and humiliating the Prime Minister of our nation, and we don't like it. And even when she comes back, trying to be reasonable, saying let's renegotiate, you're not prepared to give an inch. The reason that a no-deal Brexit's got a little bit closer is because of the sheer language and attitude, not just from the Commission, but from many in the Parliament towards the United Kingdom. I think public opinion will be very, very angry that there is no give today from anybody in Brussels whatsoever. I think many will say we're simply dealing with fanatics who are not prepared to be reasonable and make any sense of compromise.
And you can see some of that action on at Nigel Farage on my Twitter if you want to have a look at it. And we'll get it all up on the LBC website within a short space of time. But I know that I'm often accused of coming to Brussels and throwing rocks around the room. But actually, I believe today I was the only person there to put forward a really constructive way forward.
We are beginning to think that the public will come to a view that no deal is better than the backstop. And that's a big problem. It's a big problem for all of you who want to get re-elected in a few weeks' time. Because no deal means no 39 billion and your voters will be coughing up the money. No deal means the 100 million bottles of Prosecco we buy every year from Italy will become more expensive, as will 750,000 German cars. So why don't we all prepare sensibly for a no-deal scenario? Why don't we prepare to go to the World Trade Organization, use Article 24, so that we can, after we leave on March the 29th, have a 2-year period of no tariffs no quotas, no restrictions of any kind, no problems or difficulties with Ireland whatsoever. Brexit will have been delivered. You will have protected for at least 2 years your voters. That, I think, ladies and gentlemen, right now is the only possible constructive way forward.
And the odd thing was that Juncker, Barnier, there sitting within feet of me, Verhofstadt opposite me, none of them actually shook their heads. None of them gave me any forms of abuse at all. They all just sat there and stared. And that made me think maybe I'm onto something. Because look, folks, if these guys over here are not prepared to give Mrs. May anything, there is no chance with that backstop unamended that she's going to get the withdrawal treaty through the House of Commons. So we could, and even though last night there was an amendment by Caroline Spellman that went through saying the House did not want a no-deal Brexit, it's a funny thing, you know, if public opinion changes, then parliamentary numbers change. And I think that what's happening is we're looking at these negotiations. We're looking at the total intransigence of the European Commission and the European Union. And I feel we're beginning to move towards a position of saying it's time in these circumstances. If they cannot even be reasonable with us, it's time we walked away. It's time for, and they call it a no-deal Brexit, but let me rephrase that, an Article 24 Brexit, one that gives us 2 years and maybe even up to 10 years of tariff-free trade while we sort out new arrangements, but we've left the European Union. So please, if you think I've got this wrong, if you disagree with my speech today, well then come on and tell me, because I'm all ears. 0345 6060 973. If you think, Nigel, you're bang on the money, this is the right way forward, text to 84850. And I'll tell you what, if you've got a better idea, please tell me what it is. Tweet using the hashtag Farage and LBC at LBC. And of course, those of you watching us live on Facebook can comment there too. Let's go to Worcester and speak to Will, a new caller to the show. Good evening, Will.
Hello, Nigel. How are you?
I am okay. I have had a very interesting afternoon. I kind of didn't think, Will, they were going to give very much, but goodness me, weren't they bullheaded today?
Well, if I had to describe the situation that we're in, I'd use the word disaster. I mean, we've got to the stage where Parliament is still left with the same deal that was defeated convincingly. However, none of this comes as a surprise, as the EU told us that they would not open renegotiations, yet still Theresa May didn't listen. And Parliament are like nursery children, almost refusing to listen to their teachers. And the question, I think, is what next? Now, in my personal opinion, and I am only a 16-year-old, so what do I know? But I think there should be a people's vote, but not a no deal, and not an exit on WTO terms. However, I think the vote should be a very simple one. There should be two decisions. Firstly, they should be given the choice of leave or remain.
No, Will, yeah. We did the Remain vote. We've done that. We've dealt with that. There is no public appetite in this country of any noticeable size to rerun the referendum of 16.
But Nigel, the thing is, if the EU is refusing to if they're refusing to open renegotiations and Parliament is left with the same deal which it defeated convincingly, surely we should bring it back to the people. I mean, a no-deal Brexit is a huge risk. And I know you will say that it's just Project Fear, but surely people should get a vote on the deal itself by getting a choice between Theresa May's deal, no deal, Norway. They should get all the options on the table.
Well, Will, let me tell you what will happen, okay? And let me predict this. The very fact that many in this room today in the European Parliament were praising the fact that Jeremy Corbyn had finally decided to meet Theresa May. And there were a couple of comments that Barnier made towards the end. He said, look, maybe there are other solutions along the lines of Norway or Switzerland. And I think when they realise this withdrawal agreement will not go through, I think what you'll see is a renewed attempt from this place and from many in Westminster to go for a Norway-type arrangement for the European Union. So my guess is, Will, we're kind of headed down a path where it's going to be Norway or we just leave. Now, if you think we should put that to a second referendum, that's fine. But, Will, I put to you, there is no great public appetite to vote on this again.
Well, even if there isn't an appetite, the question I'd like to ask you is, you keep saying that maybe the EU are going to suddenly change their mind, but we've been saying this for months, and they keep saying that they're not going to change their mind. So what is it that you think will ultimately make them change their mind? I mean, you say that a no deal is extremely damaging to the EU, and I fully accept that, but
yes,
the EU is also very damaging. The no deal is also the EU is very damaging.
But
the
Will,
no deal is also very damaging to us.
But Will, I am putting forward a sensible and constructive compromise. And believe you me, and I mean this, I was the only person in that room this afternoon to put forward any fresh alternative. And I'm saying to you, Will, that we can leave the European Union, we can both go to Geneva, to the World Trade Organization, we can trigger Article 24, which means we will carry on tariff-free, quota-free trade with our European neighbours for 2 years and maybe up to 10 years, while in a grown-up way we sort out our future. Isn't that, Will, the real solution?
But is there an appetite for that in Parliament? Is there an appetite for that in Parliament? Because at the end of the day, Parliament have got to make this huge decision as well, because they have to vote on the withdrawal agreement itself.
Well, I get that. And, Will, I'm going to say this to you. One of the reasons last night's vote changed is because of public opinion. If the public get behind this idea, if we see opinion polls strongly supporting this idea, then I think the parliamentary numbers will change. I understand your call for a referendum, but will I point out to you that YouGov recently polled this, and only 8% of the country put a second referendum of any kind as their number one choice. Will, 16 years old from Worcester, I thank you for your call. It's 6:15. And time for the news headlines with Lisa Aziz. So all eyes on Brussels today, and would Mr Juncker, Mr Barnier, would they make some concessions? Would they help the Prime Minister, who suddenly had a Commons majority behind her idea of a withdrawal agreement, provided there was a change to it, especially with the backstop? Well, we've heard already, they were not prepared to give a single inch. One person who was really very aerated today was the leader of the Liberal group in the European Parliament and their chief Brexit negotiator, Guy Verhofstadt. And he was sort of really rather questioning the way our parliamentary system works.
I give here the list. The Grieve Amendment, that was the 4th of December. That was for a Remain amendment. Huh? Won by 22 votes. The Cooper Amendment, also Remain Amendment, that was of the 8th of January, won with 7 votes. Then another Cooper Amendment, that was yesterday, lost by 23 votes. Then the Brady Amendment, that was more a Leave Amendment, won by 16 votes yesterday. And then again a Remain Amendment, the Spellman Amendment, and to take the no deal from the table, won by 8 votes. Is that the way you can solve a problem of a magnitude?
Yes.
Is that the way to do that? Is that the way you do that?
Yes, we've been doing it for nearly 1,000 years, Mr Verhofstadt. It's called democracy. And if you win by 1 seat or 1 vote in an election and you get a majority, you win. That is how our system works. And it may not be perfect, but it's fascinating. The people like Verhofstadt, actually, they really believe that this kind of form of democracy is wrong and we must move on. And it's all part of this new pitch, this new move. They are now looking for a political consensus around a Norway-style deal. They're looking for a consensus around us going into a Norway-type arrangement. And they want Jeremy Corbyn and Theresa May to agree to it. They believe if that happens, they will get a majority, not just in Brussels, but in the British Parliament too. Well, I don't think they will. All the while, voters and the British public make it clear to our politicians, we voted to leave, we want to take back control of our borders, which wouldn't happen with Norway, we don't want to make contributions, which Norway does, and we'd like to get our fish back, which Norway has, but under this deal, I doubt we would. A lot of very angry people in Brussels today, a lot of frustrated people in Brussels today, and actually, I have to say this, I genuinely thought that Juncker and Barnier looked a little bit scared today. And it's obvious, isn't it? European elections coming up at the end of May. If they're seen to have finished up with a negotiation with Britain that potentially damages European jobs, then the Eurosceptic populist parties could do even better in those European elections. Let's go to Abdul from Forest Gate, a new caller. Good evening, Abdul.
Hi, good evening, Nigel. It's first time caller.
Welcome.
A little bit nervous. What I'm about to tell you, you're going to really like when you like what you hear at the end of the story. But I'll try and be as quick as I can.
All right.
It's a little bit complicated to say, however. So over the last few years, I mean, I didn't vote in the first, at the referendum. I've always been a neutral, and that proves I've been impartial, on the whole thing. And
Sure.
in fact, I don't vote in the general elections because I just think politics in this country is very corrupt, etc. But I'm a citizen of Britain, and I live here, and etc. Now, over the last few years, and yourself, I never had a very good view of you either, Nigel. I thought of you as a bigoted politician.
Abdul, just speak a little bit more clearly into the mouthpiece, please.
Oh, sorry. I thought that you were, the picture that the media paint of you as a bigoted politician with very strong right-wing views.
Yeah.
And that view I held of you at the time.
Abdul, I tell you what, I want to hear your story. That line's a rotter. We're going to get a better one. Let's go to Isha. Speak to Janet, a new caller. Good evening, Janet.
Oh, good evening, Nigel. Very, very pleased to be able to speak
welcome,
to you.
welcome. Now, Janet, these guys today wouldn't give us an inch. Now, of course, they're saying we should never have signed up to the backstop in the first place, and on that they're probably right. But is it time, Janet, in the face of this intransigence, that we just walked?
Well, I was really bringing you up in relation to your reference to Article 24, because you've been saying that we can negotiate through WTO rules and invoke Article 24.
Yes.
But from the things that I have read and heard, it doesn't provide an acceptable basis for a trading relationship. You said it will give us tariff-free trading for 2 or even up to 10 years.
Well, what it would do,
but
Janet...
Article 24 does not provide that. It would require the EU to sign up.
Yes, of course.
And the 10-year period is based on a misinterpretation of an obscure provision in the GATT Treaty, which underpins WTO rules, dating back to 1947, and which has not been used for at least the last 25 years. However, I hear you saying a lot that you're confident that we would be better off under WTO rules and that we would be able to trade with the rest of the world, which sounds great. So can you just reassure me that you do believe this and that we don't need to worry about jobs being lost, etc.?
Janet, Article 24 is the means by which, through the WTO, as an honest broker, you continue with your trade relationships as they currently are, right?
No, that isn't accurate.
The drawback...
I've read about it,
the drawback,
and I've heard other people say, I've heard various people on LBC say that people have been misinterpreting it and that it is not true, that it can work that way. I've also heard people who've worked for the WTO, somebody I think might have been quite high up in the organisation, who actually said that by going into WTO rules we'd be moving from the first division to the fourth division. But I know that you...
They can draw... Janet, hang on, no, stop. They can draw their political interpretation. There are some people who think Britain, being an independent, self-governing nation, would be a demotion. I heard Giscard d'Estaing, the former French president, tell me that to my face. You will be demoted. You will just become a country rather than part of this superpower. That is all a political point of view. Janet, what I can tell you is this: that the two bosses of Leave Means Leave, who I'm involved with, went out to Geneva 2 weeks ago to meet the WTO, to sit down with them and to go through this, all right? And they would be perfectly happy, for us to go on, them as an honest broker, carry on with the European Union on the current relationship whilst a new deal was negotiated. The drawback, and you're right, the drawback is that the EU have to accept this principle as well. And I completely understand that. The 2-year period is very, very clearly set. And I've been saying 2 years. This is now the third night in a row I've said 2 years. And I have said possibly tonight up to 10 years.
You did say
I've only, but on the previous nights, I didn't even mention 10 years. All right. What I'm trying to do, Janet, okay, what I'm trying to do is to face a situation where we have a European Union, albeit who've been badly misled by Theresa May. We have a European Union and a British nation who, it seems to me, in the next 58 days are not going to reach an agreement. All right? And I'm trying, Janet, I'm trying to find a constructive way forward.
I I understand that, and I keep hearing all the time that you're very confident that we can move forward and that the country will be better off. But then on the other hand, you hear the other side of the argument, including what I've just read in Sky News literally half an hour ago about the WTO rules and Article 24, which completely contradicts what you've just said. The problem we have here, Nigel, is that we have the public listening into these radio shows and hearing one person say one thing and one person saying something else. So we don't really know where the truth lies. But what I do want to ask you is this. If you are so confident that we are going to be better off when we leave through WTO rules and that we're not going to lose jobs and that we're going to prosper, are you prepared to state that anybody who loses their jobs or who actually suffers as a direct consequence of a no-deal Brexit or, a hard Brexit, that you'll be prepared to sort of, help
Janet,
them out financially if they get stuck?
Luckily for both of us, I'm worth 50 billion, so there'll be no problem doing that. Thank you very much. What a serious call that was. Let's go to Nottingham and speak to James. Hi, James. Good evening.
Hello, Nigel. How are you doing?
I'm fine. So James, I am actually trying, despite the sarcasm of our last caller, I am trying to look for constructive ways forward because I can't see this withdrawal agreement going through.
No, and neither can I.
So what do you think the right approach is now, given, and I view it today as total intransigence from Barnier and Juncker. What do you think?
I think the thing is, Nigel, is that we have seen our own politicians in this country going back and forth with various arguments, the backstop, 14 million pounds to a company who is going to run ships across the channel. And the EU has stayed firm. And you know, Nigel, and we all sort of know, but really thinking about it, that although we keep saying they need us more than them and all of this, they've stayed firm. And they know that if they start to break up, then that will lead to possibly other countries probably thinking, well, maybe we can pull this or pull that or the other. So
that's been their imperative from the start, James, and I do understand that, of course.
But then, but that's the whole point of the EU, isn't it, Nigel? In that they trade as a bloc, and when they trade with other countries like, I don't know, Korea, Japan, they have to trade as a bloc. Any weakness in the EU can be like a single bit of string can be pulled upon, and it all unscrambles. So, we've been flip-flopping around for 2 years. So what,
James, what do we do?
To be honest, just like your young 16-year-old person was saying, the best thing to do is to put it back to a vote and have two conditions. We either stay in or we stay out, and it's either A, WTO, or B, Theresa May's deal.
Well, a multiple choice referendum, James. Some of you do support that, I know, but it's not a huge number, is all I can say. That may change. I doubt it. You're listening to the Nigel Farage Show here on LBC. It's now 6:30 and time for the news with Lisa Aziz. Now, one of the losers of last night's votes, I'm going to put to you, was Jeremy Corbyn. I don't think Corbyn is having a very good Brexit. I think in many ways, by refusing to meet and talk with the Prime Minister, it kind of looked like he was putting his own interest and the interest of the Labour Party above that of the country and getting the right Brexit deal. And last night, the Yvette Cooper amendment, which was, of course, to remind you, if there wasn't an agreement by the end of February, Brexit should be, Article 50 should be extended until perhaps the end of the year. That then got the approval of the Labour Party. Now, looks like the Labour Party's official position is that we should not leave on March the 29th, but extend it to some point in the future, which clearly is not something that's going to go down all that well. Corbyn then last night decided, I will meet the Prime Minister. So she met him, but not in number 10. I mean, Len McCluskey, the boss of Unite, walked up Downing Street last week and walked through the door of number 10. Now, this meeting took place in Mrs May's parliamentary office. They weren't going to give Corbyn that privilege, I think, of being photographed walking through the front door of number 10. This is what Corbyn said after his meeting with Theresa May this afternoon.
I set out the Labour case for a comprehensive customs union with the European Union in order to protect jobs in this country and trade, and of course, very importantly, to protect the conditions that we have, the regulations on environment, consumers and workers' rights. And we set out our case for this, and I wanted to explain to the Prime Minister, which I did, that I wanted no deal taken off the table, which is why I didn't meet her until today, and I was very pleased that the House voted yesterday to take no deal off the table. And I asked for Prime Minister's assurance that we were not back into the territory of threatening no deal as a way of getting support for her failed deal, which has obviously got very limited support in Parliament.
Well, the House of Commons did vote for the Spellman Amendment, did vote to take no deal off the table, but it wasn't a binding amendment in any way at all, and that could change over the course of the next 58 days. But where Corbyn has taken Labour isn't just to support an amendment saying to delay, but they are all out now for being part of a permanent customs union. And that is also, in many ways, what Barnier was hinting at this afternoon. It's what Verhofstadt was hinting at this afternoon, and it's where they're going to try and push Mrs May. They're going to say, look, Mrs May, we can get rid of the backstop by you becoming part of a permanent customs union. If Mrs May were to do that, then the coming together yesterday of Rees-Mogg and Nicky Morgan would look nothing more like the troops meeting in no man's land in Christmas 1914, because the Tory party then would probably head towards splitting. So I just don't see quite how that commands the support of her own party. But clearly, whatever happens in this, we mustn't forget Jeremy Corbyn's voice in this is very important. But I repeat my point. I think he's having a bad Brexit. I think he's coming out as looking pretty selfish. The EU have their heads far deeper in the sand than the UK has. WTO is the best way to deliver Brexit, is what I get. Alan takes the view on Twitter. It's becoming apparent that May's looking for a scapegoat and trying to blame the EU before we crash out without a deal. Well, Alan, if she hadn't agreed to the backstop, I agree with you, we wouldn't be in this mess, but we are in this mess. I'm going to go up to Liverpool and speak to Neil, a new caller. Good evening, Neil.
Oh, good evening, Nigel.
Welcome to the show.
Oh, welcome. Thanks to speak to me. I did want to call tonight. I've just listened about what you said about Jeremy.
Yes.
I must say, you classed him as being selfish. The country at the moment couldn't have a more selfish Prime Minister. She's got the country at ransom. She's blackmailing the British public to go along with a deal. The Conservative Party is just horrendous at the moment, from Mr Rees-Mogg to Dominic Raab to Esther McVeigh. And I'm just listening to what you've got to say about the Labour Party, when in fact it's the Tory party who is in government. It's the Tory party who has created this big mess. It's the Tory party who got us to have the referendum. And I must have to express that if you're so confident in that the people do want to leave, because I must express to you that I was a leaver of...
Oh, really?
Yeah, I was. But I have actually now changed my mind, because we've had 2.5 years of factual debate. When Mr Cameron called the referendum, we had a 3-month debate, and then we was asked to vote. We've had 2.5 years now, and I feel as though this vote should happen, and you should ask the public, because I also feel as though...
And what would you ask the public, Neil? What would you ask the public?
I would go back and ask the question of the original question on Remain or Leave.
And what happens, Neil? And what happens, Neil, when Leave wins by a bigger margin? What happens then?
Well, I was just going to ask you then if you've seen a piece that Sky News has done this evening, and they've been up in Sunderland. I don't know whether you know that area was a big Leave constituency up in Sunderland. A lot of the people in Sunderland now have changed their minds. I feel at the time... Actually,
Neil, no one's changed their minds. But what you have seen in some polls, and Professor John Curtis has been very good on this, what you have seen on some polls are leavers saying they're so hacked off with the whole process that if there was another referendum, they probably wouldn't bother to vote again. That's what they're saying at the moment, and there are some of them, Neil, that are saying that. Yeah. But Neil, do you honestly believe that a second referendum is going to solve this?
Well, I feel as though the second referendum is the only way, because if I can also mention...
Would it then be the best of three, Neil?
No. Can I just mention that?
Hang on, Neil. So you're saying that if Remain was to win... If Remain wins a second referendum, that counts for the next 50 years. Is that what you're saying?
Could I just mention one point? At the time, we had the current Prime Minister, who was Mr Cameron, right? The country was going through turmoil at the time as well, with the austerity and everything else. There was Mr Cameron come out and said to the nation he would have resigned if the Leave campaign was to lose. I feel, I'm not saying everybody, but I'm saying I feel a lot of people use that vote as a protest vote for the government. And I really believe that this has not been brought up by any politician, but I believe that vote was a protest vote.
Well, actually,
in the
Neil,
government.
That's nonsense. Cameron had, to the surprise of everybody, not long before the referendum, won a majority in the general election. And you can always argue in a referendum that there'll be some people going for or against who's currently in charge, but I do not believe that was a serious dynamic there. Neil, you haven't answered my question, have you? What happens if Leave... If we have a second Leave Remain referendum, which we shouldn't, if Remain wins, then that's the end of it as far as you're concerned, is it?
If the next vote was to be a Leave vote and it was unanimous, then we should leave without any deal. And whoever is going to go take the party, whoever's for that deal, then there will be no deal. We want to leave, meaning leave.
And if we vote Remain?
And what happens Remain, then we continue to live the life that we're used to.
No, Neil. Sorry, matey. It'll be best of three then. Oh, no, I'll want another referendum then. And that's why this argument does not work. I'm going to move on to Glenn in Guildford, a new caller. Good evening, Glenn.
Good evening, Nigel. I was pleased to meet you outside the Red Lion last week, and
right. I was outside the Red Lion. You're right. Very good. Okay, well, you got me there. So, Glenn, they haven't given her much today. Is it time we just walked, or do you see some way through the middle of this?
So I think the main problem is the fact that in our government we don't have a strong opposition. So there's no one actually being able to come up with anything realistic that we can actually go for. So Theresa May can just bring out these checkers deals that are absolutely terrible and just try and limp them through the government. And then the EU can just laugh at us, basically. I think the Labour Party really needs to get its head together and go for another party leader. And I think there needs to be someone that comes in fresh, that's well known by the public, especially in the north of England and some of the more rural areas, and someone who's extremely knowledgeable on Brexit. I can think of no other better candidate.
I tell you what, Corbyn is not having a good Brexit, is he?
Not at all. No. And I'm glad they didn't let him through the doors of number 10.
No, well, there you go. Glenn, you're a star. I'll see you in the Red Lion next week. And I get this on Twitter. Until Article 50 is revoked, every day is much worse than the one before. So that's just cancel it. Get rid of it. Pretend the referendum never ever happened. I'm a first-time listener. I love how the callers can disagree with you. Well, do you know what? You and I have clearly got very different points of view, but you can come on and disagree with me. It's 0345 6060 973. I'm here to have a proper, genuine, democratic debate with you. And goodness me, we need more of that in our country. It's 6:45 and time for the news headlines with Lisa Aziz. Well, the response in Brussels here to Theresa May saying that because Parliament backed her last night on getting a change to the backstop, a change to the withdrawal agreement, and then she was confident she'd get it through Parliament, and it's just wall-to-wall no. In fact, in the last 10 minutes, Donald Tusk, who's the president of the European Council, has put this out. The EU position is clear and consistent. The withdrawal agreement is not open for renegotiation. Yesterday we found out what the UK doesn't want. We still don't know what the UK does want. Well, they all parroted that line, but in many ways, the UK did say what it wanted. It wants something different to the Irish backstop. It wants a time limit, at least, to the Irish backstop. But there's nothing. Look, we're dealing with fanatics. We're dealing with people who are building a United States of Europe, building a European army. They have this Walter Mitty view. They're going to become the dominant global superpower. There is no negotiation with them. I honestly believe it's time we walked. I don't see any other way of delivering Brexit. And I think there are ways we can do it through WTO that will not be hurtful and will open us up to a bigger world in many, many ways. I strongly have that view. Eduardo is calling from Chigwell. Good evening, Eduardo.
Hi, Nigel.
We've spoken before. Welcome back.
I'd just like to say thank you. Whilst I don't agree with you on everything, you really have spurred my passion for British politics.
Very good.
I have a two-part question. Firstly, during the news break, they announced that Barclays is moving 190 billion out of the UK. My question is, at what point does Project Fear, if you will, become Project Reality?
Oh, Eduardo, people have been moving companies and tax bases to Ireland for over 30 years for lots and lots of reasons, the chief one being that they have had a competitive corporation tax down at 12.5%. And if you talk about firms like Barclays, you talk about the big companies. I mean, let's think about Deutsche Bank, who've just taken on a massive new 20-year lease in the City of London. These firms, Eduardo, they're global in nature and they're moving divisions around the world all of the time.
They all seem to be citing Brexit, though, as the source. And regards to that,
well, of course they are.
Tax avoidance directive from the EU that's coming out actually starting from January this year is specifically for corporations, so they can't do what Barclays are doing.
No, Eduardo, that is not going to work because actually, as part of the European Economic Area, any firm within it can choose to pay its corporation tax within the EEA wherever it chooses to do so, which is why a lot of people over the years have opted for not just Ireland, but also Switzerland too. Eduardo, I know there are many big firms blaming Brexit. Of course they are, because politically, the bigger you are as a company, the more you want this place in Brussels to continue existing because it's been very good for you. It's been a great method of keeping out small and medium-sized competition. I would point this out to you, Eduardo, and say this, that if we actually look at it, you know, employment in the UK is at an all-time high. Wages last year rose, I'm pleased to say, at last by 3.3%. Foreign and direct investment into the UK has been, since Brexit, pretty good, certainly bigger than France and Germany's. Eduardo, I just don't buy this idea that we should be governed from Brussels. And when it comes to Barclays, I mean, let me just put this to you. Our biggest sector in the UK is financial services. I take the view that we should be in charge of the regulation of our financial services industry, not the European Union.
Sorry, Nigel. One last thing.
Yeah.
I've been reading into the Liverpool Research Group from Patrick Minford, and when I compare his forecast from 2007, 2014, and 2018 with other big financial forecasters such as Ernst & Young, Experian, he always seems to rank very poorly in his forecast. He cannot accurately predict the UK economy. What gives you such belief that he would be able to accurately predict the UK economy post-Brexit when his past predictions have been so badly wrong?
When have I quoted him?
Patrick Minford?
When have I quoted him?
Patrick Minford's always been by reasonable...
When have I quoted him?
Everyone cites Patrick Minford and Robert Bootle as the economists that are predicting the UK's economy post-Brexit. In fact, he's terrible at forecasting the UK economy.
His name's Roger Bootle, not...
Roger Bootle, I do apologise.
And I haven't quoted Minford on this show. I'm not sure I've done for 6 months or a year or more. Eduardo, when it comes to predictions, I tell you what, everybody can be wrong. But let me say this to you, finally. This referendum wasn't about economic projections of whether we go up a little bit or down a little bit. It was about taking our independence back and becoming a self-governing nation. Eduardo, that's what it was about. Do call again. I'm going to speak to Shibani, a new caller from Paris. Good evening.
I'm in Paris right now, but I'm actually from London, Knightsbridge.
Okay.
And before you patronize me on anything, let me just say
Sorry, why would I do that?
Because the person I spoke to laughed when I explained what I wanted to talk about.
Well, I never laugh at anybody. So who do you work for, Shibani?
I'm not going to tell you who I work for, but it's a top global bank. I'm a financial analyst, equity analyst, and I know what I'm talking about. And I have access to a lot of CEOs, and I read every single trade agreement that you talk about. So just a few things. So first, I do agree with you that a second referendum would solve nothing. Mm-hmm. But you did say yourself after the vote that, or before the vote, that if the result was close, you would call for a second referendum.
No, I didn't.
So,
no, I didn't. That's an urban myth, but keep going.
it's in the newspapers, and
Well, don't believe everything in the newspapers, Shivani, please.
financial newspapers is those are the ones I look at, not the Daily Mail, etc. And
Ones like the Financial Times, ones like the FT that said we should join the euro.
No.
Papers like that, yeah.
Wall Street Journal, please.
Yeah. All right. Well, I like that paper. That's fine.
Okay, and they're conservative, and I'm conservative. The second thing is you keep talking about democracy, but I can say for sure that the Remain vote was won on a lot of lies and slogans and misinformation.
Is that the one? Is that the Remain vote in 1975? All those lies, you mean?
Not the Remain vote. I meant the Leave vote.
I thought you meant the 75 referendum when they told us it was.
History.
Because that's where the lies were, isn't it?
Debating here. We're not debating here, and we're not. I'm having a genuine conversation. We're having a genuine conversation.
Shivani, we are short on time. Make your one big point, please.
Okay, my one big point is that Brexiteers continue to spread misinformation. The recent example, Michael Gove citing all the positive things that have happened since Brexit. None of them have any substance. You know that. They're tax evasion. There's all sorts of kind of re-domiciling or theoretical examples. And in terms of a solution, it's not a people's vote. It is people like you, Jacob Rees-Mogg, Boris Johnson, and Michael Gove, who is the leading Brexiteer, talking to the people and admitting that what you have
well, Shivani, I tell you what. I used to work for people like you. I used to work for a big bank, French based, and they went bankrupt. I remember that. All their projections were entirely wrong. We are completely and utterly out of time. I'll be back in London, away from here tomorrow, on air at 6. At 10 tonight, it's Tom Swarbrick, but up next, it's Ian Dale.
Nigel, thank you very much. Coming up at 8, it's our weekly political panel debate show, Cross Question. Today, we're going to be joined by